Okay, good morning everyone. I would like to begin today's meeting by acknowledging the traditional custodians on the land on which we are gathered and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment Committee meeting of the 10th of July 2024, and I declare this meeting open at 9 a.m. I'd like to advise attendees that this meeting is being webcast and audio recorded. I'll now move on to leaves of absence. I have received a leave of absence from Councillor Russell. It's on the screen. Can I please have someone move that a leave of absence be accepted? Councillor Hall. Is there a seconder? Councillor Murphy. Thank you, councillors. Do any councillors wish to speak to the motion? I'll now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hand. That has been passed unanimously. Oh, sorry, yep, mustn't forget Councillor Wilcox. You're noting that Councillor Wilcox is on Teams today, and I will make sure I don't forget her in the future. All right, if we move on to confirmation of previous committee meeting minutes, there's a motion displayed on the screen to confirm the previous minutes. Do I have a mover for that motion? Councillor Bradley, do I have a seconder? Mayor Raven. All those, open the floor to vote. All those in favour? That has been passed unanimously. Perfect. Okay, declarations of conflicts of interest. Do any councillors wish to declare a conflict of interest today? No, there being none, I'll now move on to general business for the managers who don't have reports as part of today's agenda. Councillors, do you have any general business for Development Assessment Manager, Mr. Stephen Ball? Councillor Bradley.
Just a sincere thank you to your staff for being exceptional.
Oh. Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Lane.
Yep. Thanks very much, Madam Chair. Stephen, your staff, in particular Thomas, went above and beyond when residents had some concerns about some activity occurring on a site that shouldn't have had activity occurring on it. I think the explanations and the reactiveness of the team was very much appreciated by the residents. They are in a flood area and they do panic at the thought of ground levels being changed and the impact it could have on them. So thank you very much, and I'm sure there'll be many more complaints into the future, so hopefully they respond just as quickly the next time. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Any other general business? Councillor St Ledger.
While we're at it, I did speak to you yesterday, Steve, but I do appreciate, mate, the work your team's done on a couple of things in Division 4 for us over the last probably 3 or 4 weeks has been outstanding. And Ben's been really good with the works out at Logan Village, managing those to help with a bit of public unrest as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor St Ledger. I have Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks again, Stephen, for your prompt attention that you've given me over the last few weeks. I've been smashed with inquiries, so you and your team have been great, eh? Thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Fraser. Do I have anything further? Okay. Mr. Ball, do you have any general business for us?
Through the Chair, I just want to thank the councillors for the feedback. The team really do value it, and when you send those little notes back to the team in response, they really do value that. I am very fortunate to have a very capable team working behind me. Thank you.
Wonderful. You enjoy the rest of your day. Okay, councillors, do we have any general business for the Acting Health, Climate and Conservation Manager, Mr. Trevor Kanapi? No. Mr. Kanapi, do you have anything for us?
Thank you, through the Chair. Thank you on behalf of the branch to the Mayor and the councillors who were able to attend the Eco Forum celebration event Saturday, which was held 2 weeks ago. And just recapping that, at that event we celebrated and acknowledged 7 of our eco champions in the city, and they were presented with eco awards, and we also provided over $198,000 to the community through Enviro grants across 42 projects. Also, just a quick update on the eco survey, which is held. So we've had, that has closed, and we received 533 responses, which is a great response rate. 56% of those participants were in that younger age bracket of between 25 and 45. So that's great to have engaged that cohort. The top 3 ways that the community like to connect with nature is gardening, bushwalking and picnicking. And council Facebook and social media is the top way community hear or like to hear about council's environmental initiatives and events. And the top 3 environmental actions community are doing at home in their everyday life. In terms of sustainability is they like to minimise waste, making sustainable living choices and creating wildlife-friendly spaces in their backyards. A more detailed analysis and update of those results will be provided in an all-councillor update. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. That's interesting information, isn't it? It's good to see. Councillor Bradley, you had a question?
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair, my hand went up when you mentioned about the gardening, but we don't really acknowledge gardening any gardens in the city anymore like we used to. It used to be like a city competition for the best gardens and different categories, and I don't know if that is something to look at in the future, but yeah, I was just curious that was the feedback given.
Yeah, through the chair, yeah, thank you. And yes, acknowledge, so yeah, when we go through these, we'll look at how we can improve or enhance and support our community in those activities.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Mr. Kanapi, you may get back to your day. Thank you. Okay, we have four reports on today's agenda. I'll move things around a little and begin with item 6.4, the Greenovate Proprietary Limited Board Chair. I note that 6.4 is a public report with a confidential attachment. A proposed resolution to move this matter into a closed session is displayed on the screen. Do any councillors wish to move into a closed session for this item? No? Okay, that's fine. I will now ask the Waste and Resource Recovery Manager, Mr. Michael Asnakar, to please speak to the report, reminding him that we're not in a closed session.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, everybody. So just in summary, earlier an external independent recruiter commenced the process of a public advertising campaign to recruit into the Greenovate Board Chair position. The recruiter undertook a merit assessment of the applicants and identified a shortlist for further consideration, and from that shortlist a preferred candidate was identified and is being presented to each of Logan, Ipswich and Redland councils for their consideration. Obviously the confidential attachments provides the applicant details. Subject to the resolutions of each council, the administration around appointing and engaging that preferred candidate will be completed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Asnakar. Do we have any questions? No? Okay. Therefore, we have a motion on the screen. Do I have a mover? Councillor Lane. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? That has, Councillor, been passed unanimously. Thank you. Nice and simple. Do we have any general business for Mr. Asnakar? Murphy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Michael, thank you so much for answering my calls this week. Curbside collection is happening in our area, and I understand that the team are really concentrating on it this time around with the amount of curbside collection that people are putting out and making sure that they're managing it properly. I know it's a difficult one. I know that you and I both love curbside collection, so so does our community, but they need to make sure that they're doing the right thing, and education is the key. This isn't where you go and put your whole house worth of rubbish out on the street. There is a certain limit that we can actually collect, and there is certain things that we can't collect as well, so like tyres. So I just wanted to say thank you to your team, and obviously Emily Shafto as well for working through that. It has been a little bit difficult, but we're certainly working through it, and hopefully we can educate our residents with regards to this great service. So thank you to you and the team.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. I have Councillor Lane.
Yeah, mine's a thank you as well. It seems like I get to contact you pretty often about issues in the local community, and the reactiveness of yourself and your team is always exemplary. So I just want to say thank you. The latest one was Kingston. where a random bin had been sitting there for ages, and it was just, you know, basically becoming an eyesore and a real issue. Within 24 hours it was resolved. So thank you very much to your team and yourself. It's appreciated.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. Ms. Dazzlencar, do you have any GB for us?
Oh, it might just be an opportune time for me to, again, you know, we do get inquiries about bin-related issues, but from a relative perspective, you know, we collect over 45,000 bins a day, and there are, you know, nearly 300,000 bins in the city. So yes, there are going to be issues that arise, you know, from time to time in relation to bins, but relatively speaking, our service is very, very good. Bins migrate, you know, we see bins with all sorts of, you know, Townsville, you know, they go all over the place. So, yeah, so when those issues arise, you know, our goal is to resolve them as soon as possible.
Thank you. You can enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks. Okay, we'll now move on to item 6.1, the Logan Indoor Sports Centre update. I note that 6.4 is a public report with a confidential attachment, a proposed resolution. Am I right? Yeah, 6.1. Sorry, 6.1. Sorry about that. Sorry. I note 6.1 is a public report with a confidential attachment. Am I right? Yes. Confidential report. Confidential report. Okay, I don't know where this has gone wrong. Sorry, just give me a moment. Yes. Oh, no, sorry, the scripting's wrong. Sorry. I know this is a confidential report. Sorry, councillors. A proposed resolution to move the matter into closed session is displayed on the screen. Do any councillors wish to move into a closed session? No? Okay, I will now ask the Economic Development and City Planning Manager, Mr. Dave Radich, to please speak to the report, reminding him we're not in a closed session.
Through the Chair, so the organisation continues to work with the Commonwealth and the state government around the venue located in Logan Central. I guess the purpose of this report was to provide an update of where we're at with that process and what the forward look on that is. So without going into confidential, I'm really limited in the amount of information I can share with the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Radich. Councillors, do we have any questions, keeping in mind we're in open session? Bit of move. Okay, Mayor Raven has moved the motion on the screen. Do I have
I do have one quick question. Sorry, I've got my hand up.
An open session?
Yep.
Yeah, okay, sorry. Councillor Wilcox.
Just one question, Dave. Does this lock in the design?
Through the Chair, no, it doesn't. Detailed design will occur after investment decision.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Okay, we have a mover with Mayor Raven. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Murphy. All those in favour? Okay, that has been passed unanimously with the exception of Councillor Bradley. How do you vote?
Against.
Okay, thank you, councillors. We will now move on to item 6.2. I note that item 6.2 is a public report, and I will now refer to Mr. Radich to please speak to the report.
Thank you and good morning, councillors. So last year, council endorsed a TLPI. So that was to include the flood mapping and to include some policy which we were required to include as part of the state government policy. So that TLPI has had a good road test, close to 8 months. I think it's been in operation for. And like most policies, there's always a point of refinement that we look for as officers and seeking some feedback from the councillors. So there was a round of councillor one-on-ones to talk about the TLPI. Some councillors chose to meet with staff, some didn't, which is also fine. And I guess what we're looking to do now is, now that the TLPI has been in place for a decent amount of time, not a huge amount of time, not 12 months is usually when we look to do a significant review. we've come up with some changes to policy. The origin of this report, I guess, and the review of the current TLPI is a general business item from Councillor Raven, now Mayor Raven, where he thought that, he heard feedback from the community that some of the parts of the TLPI weren't really meeting community expectations. So we've taken that on board, and we've looked to loosen up some of the requirements. So I guess giving you a forward look at what this actually means for the community is the current TLPI, which has some fairly strict provisions in it. We're proposing that be repealed and replaced with this TLPI. However, the decision of council at the moment is for us to send this TLPI to the state government for their approval, because it does require their approval before we can enter into a TLPI. And I'll remind the committee that TLPI is not like a normal planning scheme. It comes into effect straight away. People cannot lodge retrospective DAs like they can with previous versions of the planning scheme. So it's something that comes into effect immediately. So one of the reasons why we've brought this review forward, so usually, as I said, we'd usually wait for 12 months to road test it. We've got a state government election coming up, and we don't want to get caught up in the caretaker mode. So getting a decision now to start to prepare a TLPI, and then looking to get the minister's endorsement and to adopt it before caretaker is our preferred approach. So some of the changes that are in the report, and I note that there's a lot of details in the report. We've tried to distill it down in the text. So there was 4 risk categories. So we had a very low, a low, a moderate, and a high. We've now just got a low, moderate, and high. And based on some feedback that we were receiving from the community and from DA, there were some issues with new houses obtaining flood-free hazard access. So we've been able to resolve that as part of the TLPI. Access requirements for houses are only picked up where new houses or increased dwellings are being built, and there's a few tweaks around the non-residential provisions. We got some feedback that some of those were a bit tight for people out in the community that were changing existing buildings from a warehouse to a cafe. They were getting picked up in some of those requirements. I'll hand over to Megan to talk through any of the other requirements that I've missed. I'll hand over to Megan now.
Thanks, Dave. So through the chair, I guess one of the key risk elements that the TLPI sought to manage was isolation risk. It's a big part of our flood risk response is we can potentially be isolated, or parts of our community can be isolated for quite long periods of time. And so the mitigation that was proposed under, or is under the current TLPI, is that flood-free access is maintained through a flood event so that residents can access the services that they need during a flood and are less reliant on emergency response. But one of the things that we've been able to go back and refine is there's certain circumstances that might not really be conceived as isolation. So, for example, if the period that you're cut off is really only a day or less than a day, then that's probably not considered to be isolation. And so that's the sort of refinement that we've been able to build in. We relax the requirement to have flood-free access so long as you are only cut off for a short period of time. Related to that, for a non-residential use, so industrial commercial use, there is also a provision for some short-term isolation of 4 hours. We recognise that is pretty short, and the reason for that is we think that there would be motivation for people to make risky decisions in times of flooding if they're stuck at work, stuck stuck at work, and wanting to get home to children, wanting to get home to their house and their family. So it is quite a short period of time, because we do think that people generally won't tolerate being isolated at a workplace for too long. And then the other aspect, so there's two aspects of that isolation. There's the warning time, so that's the amount of time that you have to take action and remove yourself from a potentially at-risk location. And then there's that period of isolation. They are two quite different aspects. So for a non-residential use, we've recognised that people generally aren't going to be looking to stay on the property so long as they have 10 hours of warning time to realise that something is happening, take action to leave the property, or leave the premises and get home. Then they don't need to maintain that flood-free access in that instance. So that doesn't apply for residential, because people do need to be able to come and go to get what they need. That's the key points.
Happy to take any questions, councillors.
Thank you. Okay, I have Councillor Bradley, then Mayor Raven, then Councillor Lane, and then Deputy Mayor Bannon. Thank you. Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, through the chair. I might leave my questioning until Councillor Raven, Mayor Raven, has spoken, because it related to something he has raised.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Mayor Raven.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Councillor Bradley. This morning, Dave, I circulated the TLPI sort of comparison between 1 and 2 that you gave. Thank you very much. And apologies to council I didn't get it sent through sooner. There's a little bit there, and I'll get to the most interesting part last. So I've got some other questions generally that I don't think we'll be able to address through this TLPI process, because as you said, we're on a timeline. We want this to be approved before the state goes into caretaker. But the feedback that I get regularly from industry and from residents is confusion around the red zone, which indicates high flow, but it's actually high flow and high depth. When we get to the final planning scheme, that needs to be differentiated, because there's an engineering solution for high depth. There's not really an engineering solution for high flow, because it's always going to be quite dangerous. Whereas if it rises slowly and it gets very deep, but it's not moving fast, that can be engineered to be managed. And it's probably, at the moment, it's one of the most common questions I'm getting asked, which is how come I can't build in the in the red zone when it's not actually high flow, it's very slow rising and just gets very deep. And that's for non-residential uses, because obviously we wouldn't approve any residential uses in the red zone. So there's still actually, and this is the problem with the current model, you've gone down to 3 risk overlays, but there's actually 4 still, and the red zone is the 4th one, but that doesn't show up on the overlay. You've got to know to go look for it, which is problematic for people who aren't in the industry, but people who are in the industry can see it now. So there's still 4, and it's not clear that that 4th one exists unless you know to look for it, which is a big problem, because if you're just looking at an overlay and you go, oh, I'm in the low risk, but that gets or I'm in the medium risk, but that gets a high flow on it, then it's an issue. And the other piece of information that would be super useful to be able to publish, and I don't think you'll be able to do it in this TLPI, but just for future reference, is information on warning times. So being able to easily see what your warning time is during a flood, if you are being resilient and proactive and you're going and checking your flood data, you're going, hey, I live in Waterford West and my flood warning time is 6 days. That means that I know that I've got plenty of time to go out, stock up if I am on a flood island, and get ready so that I can prepare for that. Whereas at the moment, there's no easy way to see what your flood warning times are, and I don't know how easy it is to publish that information, but it would be very, very helpful, especially for people who are already in the in the red zone, because it got approved before we knew what a red zone was. They would really like to know how long they've got before it either gets very fast or very deep. So that information would be super useful to have in a future TLPI. What I think we can adjust, because it's a pretty small change, or future planning scheme, is that isolation window. You've got it set for 24 hours. Is there a reason why you picked 24 hours?
Through the chair. So there is no hard and fast science on that amount of time. It's really about our consideration of how long we think people can reasonably look after themselves. And I guess we draw on our LDCC experience. So there are some AI, so Australian Institute of Disaster Resilience references that do go out as far as 72 hours. Our lived experience in the LDCC is we start to get calls for requests for help far earlier than that. We did have an initial study done at the outset of this policy development that did a little bit of benchmarking and recommended 36 hours. So we have gone more conservative than that just because we felt comfortable with 24 hours as people having enough supplies to get them through a day before they're starting to call on help. But there is no black and white answer to that.
Cool. So if it's a decision like that, I think it'd be good to understand councillor's preference. I mean, I'm sure Councillor Penham will have comments that he'd like to add. When I first looked at it, I thought 24 hours is pretty short. I know I get isolated at my property for about 2 to 3 days in a 50-year flood. Everybody knows in that part of Waterford West that they get isolated. There's some people that get isolated for a week, and when you go to those people, when the water comes back down, they're having a party. They know that they're getting isolated for a week. They've got generators, they've got beer, they've got food, they've got everything that they need. They've got fences that open because they're all on a hill together. So there's about 8 houses that all get together and have what they call the flood holiday. And that's what resilience looks like. And I think if people know that they're on a flood island, which they do now, whereas previously we didn't really talk about it as an idea. So now we have information that tells them they're on a flood island. If that information tells them how long to expect to be isolated for, they can make sure they prepare for that. We can also get that message out to people when we know we've got a big flood coming. Hey, if you're on a flood island, now's the time to go and load up on enough supplies to last for this many days, because that's how long we think you might be isolated for. So I'd be more comfortable with seeing either 48 or 72 hours as a stretch, because 72 hours is a long weekend, and everyone's got water. If your house is dry, you've still got water. Even if you're on tank, you can trickle it out, and water is the main resource you need to survive. And generally, you'll have 2 or 3 days of food in your cupboards. And if you're on an island with other people, then shared resources surely has to come into play as well. Because I know if I ran out of sugar, my neighbour would totally sort me out, because once we're isolated, it's like a flashback to the 90s. Everyone's doors unlocked, we're all walking around the streets having yarns to each other, which is great, and that's what resilience looks like. And so being able to get that message out to people, I think, if we have clear guidelines and we're communicating clearly about where the flood islands are, I think we can help people prepare so that they've got more than 24 hours of food in their cupboards. They could do a longer period pretty safely.
Through the chair, if I may respond a little bit to that. Take your point about resilient communities. It's wonderful to see that level of resilience. I guess we still need to be really clear that we're making decisions about where we consciously put new development rather than building resilience in our current communities. So that's great that we can give people more information about how long they're cut off. This is what you should be prepared for. But should we continue to put people in that situation is quite a different question, I think.
I'd be comfortable with it, especially with the amount of data we've got now to be able to communicate with people.
Thank you, Mayor Raven. I have Councillor Lane, followed by Deputy Mayor Bannon, followed by Councillor Bradley, followed by Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks, and I had 2 questions to ask, but your comments actually raised some more questions for me. So in 2022, Yarrabilba had access cut. Does this propose that we don't build anymore in Yarrabilba because they get cut off? Is that what it does?
Through the chair, no. So the refinements that we're proposing are an improvement to what we currently have under the TLPI. Somewhere like Yarrabilba has access to supplies within Yarrabilba, in the hope that the Woolworths stays open.
Less than 24 hours, all the food was gone. They didn't have any resilience whatsoever. I was in that room too.
So it's a really difficult thing to manage. As our development assessment team are trying to make decisions about whether a particular property has access to services, we don't know for sure if those services will actually be available in the future. That shop may move. Or, yes, they may lose power. I guess that's a separate exercise for council to work with the community, to work with industry to improve that resilience, to educate them on the need to have generators and build that resilience. It is difficult to manage, but in that instance we would say that there are services hopefully available.
The reason why I asked that question is so we're putting greater impost on people that live independent rather than in a residential setting. So we're saying to them, you must have access when building a new house, but we've got a whole community of thousands of people that actually get cut off that have limited resilience and are based on that. So what you're saying is you want them to have access to emergency services, community services, and potentially some food.
Yeah, fundamentally access to water and food. So the primary things that a residential house would need to not need to draw on emergency services. Obviously, if there's a medical situation or something, that's different, but they should be able to access food and water.
That's okay. So how many individual houses requested assistance through the Local Disaster Coordination Centre during the 2022 floods, as in individuals out on rural properties, that potentially would be part of a subdivision in the future that would need to adhere to this thing? I'm just asking out of curiosity. I believe in flood mapping, don't get me wrong. It's just we're putting the onus on individuals rather than whole communities. We're still building in impacted communities that get cut off for days, but we're actually looking at individual property owners in this instance. I'm just curious.
So unfortunately we can't undo where we've put development in the past, and that may be another mechanism that we need to look at, improved roads to increase the flood immunity of those access points. We can only look forward, and so we aren't supporting developing new areas that aren't able to access those services. So we're trying to reduce that future burden on emergency services.
No worries. So an example of that would be Boomerang Court at Cedar Creek, I think it is. And so Boomerang Court, the road gets cut off every time we have a decent downpour. It's literally a lake going across the road, and they're in for 3 days. So they would be captured by these changes effectively if they were developing further up the road.
Yes, if they were looking to do further development, so the existing houses are there, we can only help them to be more resilient in that situation, but we wouldn't want to see increased development in areas like that won't be able to access what they need.
Okay, so substantially huge communities are okay to continue developing and continuing to build the numbers rather than individuals being able to do the same thing.
So the policy applies to all scales of development.
So Yarrabilba would be one of those scales.
Well, yeah, it's a historic.
Flagstone, yeah. I'm
but they
curious
have.
because it seems like so someone on, and I don't live on Boomerang Court. I have a relative that used to live on there, so I know the flood. That's why I'm referencing it. But there's a lot of people out there that can see Beenleigh heading towards their way pretty quickly. And they'll be looking at the future, whether or not they can build residence for their kids because they can't afford to do this. Would that impact that capacity if they wanted to subdivide their block, give it to their kid? They wouldn't be able to build on there because of the flood resilience. I'm just curious whether or not we're targeting single people versus whole community.
No, so we're definitely not trying to target certain types of development. Dave made a good point that Flagstone, Yarrabilba are state PDA areas, so we have limited control over how they are developed. However, we are advocating for the same sort of policy. But no, it applies, so trying to maintain that access to services applies to single development or multi-development. And as I said, our future mechanisms for trying to unlock areas may be that we try and support increased centres or services that people might need so that we can develop areas, but we don't want to put the development there without the services and then try and catch up later, because in the meantime we are burdening our response agencies.
So we won't have another Logan Reserve in the future that gets cut off by School Road, Logan Reserve Road, and...
Okay.
So we'd prefer not to, but the state government has given us Buchan, an area that floods, as part of the draft regional plan, which is the same thing they did to us with Logan Reserve. So they extended the urban footprint. So we hope not. What this policy does, if you're in a floodplain and you've lived there, we're not going to kick you out because we're changing this policy. We're even going to let you extend your house a little bit more. But when it becomes intensive development in some of those really high risk areas, we're going to say no because there's too much of a risk to property. So that's really so Yarrabilba, Flagstone, state government, Buchan, state government, Logan Reserve, given to us by the state government. We're trying to manage the flood in this area. This is a step forward. So we heard the feedback from the community. We heard the feedback from councillors around how the current TLPI was too strict. People couldn't build sheds. People couldn't, extend their houses. So we're trying to refine that, and we'll continue to refine that over time. And Megan will continue to roll out the flood mapping. I believe almost the entire city's been mapped.
So we're at about 90% of the floodplain now, and that is part of the reason why we are proposing a TLPI at this stage. We've got new data that we'd like to bring in.
No worries. The reason, sorry, that was a separate thing. So my initial question was, with the flood mapping, you've got your different levels of intensity. What it doesn't have is the height. So a good example is down at the bottom of Kingston, where all those units went under, all those people lost their possessions and what have you. The residents down there don't know what the different levels of flooding mean in terms of actual height. They've got the flow, they've got the intensity, they've got all those things, but it doesn't say like down in Clara Street at Logan Central or Merrin Street, it doesn't say that it could be 20 centimetres. That particular flood mapping that we've done, 20 centimetres, 50 centimetres, 3 metres, it doesn't say anything like that. And they know what's coming through their areas. It's just, I'm wondering whether or not there is a reason that the heights aren't on there. Is that just...
No, through the chair, that information is all available, and so development approval will still reference heights, those flood levels. That's an important part of the policy, and that information in terms of flood levels or flood depths is all available through the Logan Flood Portal. Be happy to speak to residents and help them navigate that.
That'd be awesome. Thank you very much.
It's all right. Thank you, Councillor Lane. Okay, I have Deputy Mayor Bannon, followed by Councillor Wilcox.
Thanks, through the chair. Feel for you, Dave, because the irony is the state government implement these changes on us, but the state government don't do them in their own PDAs. It's like, you know what I mean? So the state put the PDAs in Flagstone, Yarrabilba, they legislate us to update the flood mapping, they put these in, but they don't abide by it. So that's not your fault, but mine, Bowen. And I appreciate the fact that both yourself, your team, Megan, your team are trying to, I won't say polish her because I want to, but I can't say that word in here, but you're trying to make it better as you're going. The only issue that I have, because I'm being the most critical and sometimes unfairly towards you, Megan, so I'm rapt that you're doing it the way you're doing it. The only issues that I have is the 24-hour thing. I'm emergency services, so I experience it probably better than anyone. The questions I've got, like how deep's cut off? So when I look at a property and they say, look, you can't get out of that road, you've got no access for what the data shows is 20 hours, 24 hours, how deep's cut off? Are we saying water on the road full stop, or is it the next amount of height across the road that's not safe for a car?
So through the chair, yep, so there is defined limits and hazard or depth velocity limits on that. So it's generally 300 millimetres deep, but it also needs to account for the velocity.
The velocity of it.
Yep. So it's a hazard 1 is the technical reference.
The reference, cool. I understand new development 100% because that is on us. It's so probably the infill development where you've got someone that's bought a property, vacant block, the house is out of a flood zone, put the property in, they can't build on it, but they've got a network of neighbours. So they're the ones I find hard, especially for the 24-hour argument, because even though at the moment, short-range forecasts, they can't forecast the sunrise properly. And I trust you, I've got a civil business, so I'm forever saying, you said it wouldn't rain, and it's raining on my job. So, but these long-range forecasting, when we noticed, so the last 1 in 100, because 74 wasn't one, so it was the 1800 floods, was that right?
Sorry, there was some large floods, the late 1800s.
Yeah,
yes.
That was the last 1 in 100, going by their levels.
74 was approximately.
Yeah. I can't remember the date, and if I say it, it'll sound like we talked before the mayor, it sounds like Yellowstone episode, so you're going to know that flood's coming. Like, you're going to have months of data, like hopefully a month to say it's coming. The mayor will be all over Facebook doing selfies at the creek. Like, everyone's going to know that flood event's coming. So to me, I don't think 24 hours, like I think 72 is a long weekend, and most, especially talking selfishly about rural property, most are on tank water, so you're going to have water. We all have generators. New residents can be educated in that. But I just struggle with the 24 hours, because if you're on a property that's, your house isn't in a flood zone, not at medium risk, it's totally dry, you can sit there for 24 hours. Like I'm with you, when we have a flood, I go out to my farm, unless I have to get picked up at a chopper, I love staying there for 5 days. So the only trouble I have is the 24-hour thing, and I think if I could move that window out to 72, as the Mayor suggested, that's 3 days. You know it's coming, you've got plenty of time. So that would be the only thing that I have an issue with it. And I know there was a conversation around, what if there's an elderly person that trips over and needs medication? Well, emergency services don't do food. I know it's talked about food and stuff. We don't do food, for starters. I've swum through creeks to help people, but if someone needs medication, we will get to emergency services. And you'd hope the resilient community, especially in these areas, would know of the elderly people there. I know in Edgewater they do that, where they get their island. So my biggest problem is I don't agree with the 24-hour. I think 72 is reasonable, because it affects, we're talking about a 1% flood, and if you talk about an elderly person tripping over and not having the medication, you're talking about a 1% there. I understand state legislation means we have to do that 1% as in a flood. I don't think as a council we should be making it to 1% when it comes to isolating a property and knocking back a house. That's all. Thank you.
So through the chair, and I spoke to Megan about this today, and she mentioned it in committee. So the windows that they got from their consultant report was 24 to 36. So Megan feels like 36 could be a starting point, and see how that goes with the community. That will resolve the matter that we spoke about this morning, Councillor Bannon. And building on that, you would have all seen the LGAQ motions that were put up around uniform flood policy. So we are making calls on whether it's 24 hours, whether it's 36 hours, whether it's 72 hours. The state should just tell us what do they actually want us to do, because all our colours are different. When you look at different flood mapping, it's confusing for developers. We're having to get you guys to make calls on things. So that LGAQ motion, the intent of that was for this state to provide a model code of how we actually roll these risk things out, because it seems like it's up to every individual council to make a call based on what the state will accept.
Through the chair, I agree with you 100%. They should have done that from the start. It would have saved a lot of heartache, because as councillors, well, I get it. I'm not sure if I don't talk on behalf of everyone, but I constantly get off scenic rim different. I get hammered with that. So I agree with that 1,000,000%. I'm still going to argue over the 36. I don't know. I don't want to push my luck, but if 36 is where we start, well then I think we could. It's a start. And like I said, I appreciate all the work you're doing. Yeah, what about 48? Come on, Megan, 48.
Okay, thank you, Deputy Mayor Bannon. I'll now move on to Councillor Wilcox.
Hello, hopefully you can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me? Okay, sweet. Thanks. Thank you, Councillor Lane. I'm just going to go down the same sort of pathway, talking about Flagstone as well, because I don't just have isolated properties, I get isolated communities. So I find it a really hard stretch when we're trying to say, you've got to have like 24 hours when I have whole communities cut off for days. And at a minimum, I think it's been 72 hours since I've lived here 20 years. 72 hours is the shortest amount of time that they've been flooded in. And the idea around it for me is most of the residents out there know that this is coming. Now, especially now since I've advocated and we now have flood cameras on Flagstone Creek, people can monitor it. They know basically how long they've got before, yes, they'll be cut off. Even I was out in the last floods and I went, right, I know I've got half an hour to get in and out before the bridge goes under, and that sort of thing. But it's the newer community members that are moving out there that don't realise they're going to be isolated for days. And then, when I'm on Facebook and I'm going, hey, this road is now open, you can now get out. But it's at the top end of my division and people are contacting me going, hey, I've got to get to work. And I'm like, you don't understand. You're on an island for the next 3 days. And they're like, what? I've got to get to work. And I'm like, ring your boss, go stand near the river, and that sort of thing. But most of the residents are okay. They go and have barbecues and beers down by the river and that sort of thing and just watch it. But I do find it really hard to say, we're trying not to isolate people for 24 hours when I've got whole communities of thousands of people that are isolated for at least 72. And yes, we have shops there now. We have more than an IGA since the huge floods of 2013. Sorry, just referring to my flood maps or my flood photos on my wall. We've now got a Woolworths and a Coles down there, but they actually still can't stay open because they don't have generators big enough to actually have the whole store open. None of the shops do, even though I've been advocating for that and saying, you're in a community that floods every couple of years. Can you please stay open? No one down there, even though I don't know how many times I've stood up and said this, you need to go back to the old click credit card machines, EFTPOS machines, so that you can actually still maintain some sort of connectivity and that sort of thing. We do have one fantastic 7-Eleven that stayed open, and she just did it by the goodness of her heart, come back and pay me, when we're back online, because they do eventually drop out and they don't have a really good phone connection because it floods at Henderson Creek. So Telstra has to come in and Enginex has to come in, cut off the power, and they cut off phone services for safety reasons and stuff like that. So I'm finding it a really hard pill to swallow, and I'm pretty sure the residents do as well, when we're saying, we don't want you cut off for 24 hours, when I get thousands of people that get cut off for days on end. And I'm lucky that so many police and ambulance officers actually do live over there. And, I've got the RFS as well, where we actually now work together and we're like, okay, what personnel have we got that are over there? Are they taking home their equipment? We're not advertising the fact that they're doing it, but they do, and then Greenbank RFS go and move trucks into certain areas home with people so that we know that we actually do have some services and that sort of thing. So that's my little thing on this. Like, I find it really hard to understand for those residents that get cut off in whole communities. Even part of Division 9 gets cut off. There's like 3 islands down the bottom and that sort of thing. So I don't know. I think that's a really hard pill to swallow in the TLPI, saying, they've got to have 24 hours flood-free access or whatever, when you've got thousands of people that at least are cut off for 72 hours at a minimum.
Sorry, through the chair. So I guess what I'm hearing is, yes, we already have high levels of isolation in our community, large areas that at the moment are cut off for days, and it is an impost on the residents and it's an impost on council. So again, what we're trying to do is not exacerbate that in the future and make it worse, and be very conscious about where we put our new residents so that they aren't in that situation. And for our existing areas that get isolated, we need to use non-land use policies, so other mechanisms, to try and increase the resilience of those communities. And again, just to reiterate, the current TLPI requires that for residential use, or for all uses, there must be low flood hazard access maintained, so there is no isolation. What we're contemplating under this proposed TLPI is that there's some relaxation of that if they're only cut off for a period of time, and we've nominated 24 hours. We may extend that to 36 hours. So we are making some allowance as compared to where we're at now.
So question then, if we're trying to reduce isolation, on residents and on communities, when are we going to actually make sure that we're building the correct flood-free road infrastructure so that they're not actually cut off?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Part of our road planning, aside from safety matters and aside from capacity matters, could start to look at, how can we reduce isolation and therefore support increased development in certain areas. That's a future road planning exercise that we would need to go through. So until that infrastructure is there, we don't want to support intensifying those areas at the moment. There are some roads and some areas that we simply can't make flood immune. Buchan was mentioned earlier, Waterford Tamborine Road, it's a state road, but even if it wasn't, there's no way we could lift that up to a 1% flood level. It's just not possible.
Yep, I get that, but Flagstone is a cul-de-sac. It is one way in, one way out. they live in a cul-de-sac, and we're getting more and more people in there before any extra road infrastructure gets delivered. So just a point.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. So just confirming with the report today, if this doesn't get up today, we're basically the current TLPI still stays in place, doesn't it? So these amendments are to effectively try to improve it. So I just wanted to make that clear.
Yes.
Okay. I have Councillor Heremiah and then Councillor Bradley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If the report does get up today, does the current TLPI stay in place until the Minister approves this proposed change?
Through the Chair, yes, that's correct. So we will repeal the current TLPI, which has the harsher rules, and replace it with this TLPI.
Thank you for that. And I've been reading the explanatory statement, the attachment of this report, and I've gone over it a few times, and my understanding of it is this new TLPI consists of two reforms. One reforming the flood map and one reforming the flood policy.
That's right.
One good, one bad. And they've been grouped together in the same TLPI. So page 3 of the report states that, quote, because of this new TLPI, some properties will experience an elevation or extension of assigned risk areas from the current TLPI. I've gone through the report and I'm trying to figure out how many properties will experience that, and I can't find the number. Could you let me know how many properties will be experienced by this change, will be affected by this change?
Yeah, so through the Chair, I'll just clarify. So one of the policy changes that was made was around expanding the area that we could support vulnerable uses. So currently, they're only supported in the very low risk category. We extended that to the very low and low, which meant that fundamentally the same policy applied to the very low flood risk area and the low flood risk area. So all that we're proposing is that we combine them. There's no increased constraints on those areas. The flood data doesn't change. It just, I think the reference that you're making is that there could be a perception that someone's gone from very low to low risk, but in fact the level of risk hasn't changed. It's just that we've consolidated.
Thank you. My question states that some properties will experience an elevation or extension of assigned risk areas. I understand the context. I'm asking how many properties. It says some. I'm wanting a number.
So the other aspect of that could be referencing is we're bringing in new data. So we're bringing in some creek studies, which means that if you are currently affected by riverine backwater, you may only sit at, say, a very low level of risk due to that riverine backwater. However, once we introduce the creek flooding, it may be that you're at a higher level of risk due to that. That could be the reference to an increased level of risk. We can provide numbers around that. I don't have them at hand, unfortunately, but we can take that on notice.
Thank you. I'd appreciate that. The reason why it's important is because when properties do experience that increased level of risk for different reasons to do with our policies, it's not just a document on a website or on a desk. It's a real-life impact on people. There's many people that live in the Windaroo and Beliva Creeks catchments that they don't have a superannuation fund in the traditional sense. Their property is their retirement fund. They've purchased their property, they've lived in it, they've got equity as the years gone on, and government policy, especially around flood mapping and changing risk areas, can result in a decrease in value due to the limited potential for land use of that property. Now that doesn't just affect the big end of town developers, but it affects everyday families living in these catchments that rely on their property's value for retirement. So when we make government policy, an approach I try to take is an empathetic approach that understands the impact. And until I can understand how many properties will be impacted, how many people will be impacted, and even some figures on what will be the economic cost or benefit of this policy, I can't support that specific reform within this TLPI. The other reform is to do with the flood policy. Now that sounds interesting. There was a discussion around the 24-hour, 36-hour, 72-hour questions. The concern that I hold regarding the flood policy reforms is it sounds good, but but it sounds relatively arbitrary in terms of the hour figure. We know that these documents will be challenged in court. They tend to be challenged in land court a lot. So making sure that whether we put 24, 36 or 72, we can support it with the best amount of evidence. So when it is challenged, we can hold up documents that have been voted for instead of the courts making our policies. I think that's prudent. I think it's also interesting that these policies are grouped together. I think going forward it would be good to investigate seeing if we can separate reforms. I might like the flood policy reform of this TLPI, but not like the flood map reform. But they're grouped together, and when I vote today, I can't choose which one. I have to vote for all of them or none of them. For that reason, I can't support this proposal today, but I'm looking forward to more work on the flood map, and I appreciate the team's focus on trying to make the situation better. Thank you.
So through the chair, if I may respond a little. So the policy aspect that we've developed is around how that risk map looks, number of categories, what colour they are, and then what development is supported in each of those areas. The underpinning flood risk data is a technical assessment. That's not a policy decision. That's us making our best estimate of where we think the highest flood risk areas are or the lowest flood risk areas are. So the change in Beliva Windaroo is not because of any policy change, it's because we've undertaken new studies and brought in new data. So those increased risk areas are not due to a policy change, they are due to new data being introduced.
Thank you, and I look forward to receiving the data on the amount of properties that have been affected. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeremiah. I have Councillor Bradley.
Thank you through the chair. I really appreciate the officers' reports. Thank you, and the personal experiences expressed by councillors. It's good to get other people's perspective and the responses given. My understanding, the changes are to improve future development. Is that correct? Based on evidence?
Through the chair, yes. So we've had some real life experience with the current TLPI. We've received feedback about some challenges with the TLPI, and we are putting forward policy tweaks that we think are acceptable from both a personal risk and property risk.
And that's based on evidence, that's based on facts, it's not based on personal perspectives. Is that correct?
This is all evidence-based.
Thank you. What is the risk to council then, based on what you've just said, being challenged?
Through the chair, so the minister signs off the TLPI, so he says, oh sorry, she says that it's in accordance with their state planning policies. DA will administer the TLPI, and I guess it's for them, if there are challenges, it's for them to uphold the TLPI in court. There's always a risk that you get challenged on policy.
Thank you. And what is the probability that these changes will be made before the state government caretaker?
Through the chair, so if we receive a decision of council next week, we feel that we can get these endorsed before caretaker. So they will be in place this year.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley, and I have Mayor Raven.
Thank you. Just to wrap it all up, so the policy changes are very good, and like all of the other ones other than the one we're talking about, which is the 24 hours, is great. And you said right at the start, there's no hard and fast data that says whether you should do 24 or there's something that refers to 36 somewhere, but it's not specific. So that sounds like the council has the flexibility to determine what it believes is appropriate based on what it thinks is best for the community. And then the minister, if the minister thinks we've gone too far, she could bounce that and say, not willing to do 72, but I'll give you 48, or maybe I'll give you 36, because ultimately she has to approve what we endorse. So my preference would be to put forward a recommendation that goes to the bigger number, and if she thinks it's too big, she can use her best judgment, the very smart people in the state government, to say, no, we want smaller, and then we accept that outcome because we have no choice, and we move forward from there. Is there an issue with taking that approach?
So through the chair, I'll hand that over to Megan.
So my professional advice, I would not be happy to support 72 hours. I would struggle with 48. I'd be more comfortable with 36.
Okay.
That's based on my experience in the LDCC. We've seen communities that say that they're resilient, but we do deliver food to them within a short period of time.
Understood, and appreciate that advice. So then I guess it's up to councillors to go, the staff are suggesting 36 hours, what do we want to do? And so how would we implement one or the other? Because the chair's about to have to test that. Is there an alternate recommendation that you've got, Dave, that lets us change that number around, or do we just have to give you some kind of indication?
Through the chair, so we have drafted a amended recommendation, and I think Corporate Meeting Services, Jackie, you have it. That recommendation is 36.
Okay.
I guess by resolution you can change that number. You'll just need to replace 36 with another number. The wording of it effectively says that you'll endorse the TLPI, we'll send it to the Minister, but recommendation 3 includes increasing the isolation duration from 24 to 36 hours. You would then make a determination where you want to go with those hours.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Raven. Councillor Bradley, you had a comment?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious, is this the officer's recommendation? Do we have to, as councillors, if this is put up, give an explanation to go against council officers' recommendation, I should say?
Based on some conversations, I've provided meeting services a recommendation that can be amended if council wanted to change the isolation duration. Our recommendations are what is in the report currently.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Look, based on that, I would still like to test the original motion if possible. If that doesn't get up, then we will look to put up the second motion. And I believe that Councillor Wilcox has also been sent a copy of the second motion. So we have the original motion on the screen, I believe. Do I have a mover for this motion? Councillor Bradley, do I have a seconder? A seconder. Okay, so that motion has failed. If we can then put up the second motion, please, the amended motion. I'll just give councillors a moment to have a read, make sure they're happy.
Can someone just read it out to me because I can't see it?
I believe it's been sent through to you. Councillor Wilcox, have you received the amended one? Sorry, we're just checking. It was emailed through. Councillor Wilcox? Yep. All good, Councillor Wilcox? Yep. Okay, do I have a mover? Councillor Murphy, do I have a seconder for the motion? Mayor Raven. I'll now open the floor to vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. That has been... Okay, so I'll just go around the room and ask how you vote. Mayor Raven?
For.
Councillor Bradley? Not working?
Just use John's.
Can I abstain, and I'd like to provide a reason that the manager actually stated that their recommendation was 24 hours as per the report.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. Councillor Lane?
For.
Councillor St Leger?
For.
Councillor Jackson?
For.
Councillor Hall?
Abstain, and my abstaining reason is I believe state government should have been doing this instead of council itself.
Councillor Fraser?
For.
Councillor Jeremiah?
Against.
Deputy Mayor Bannon?
For.
And Councillor Murphy?
For.
And Councillor Wilcox?
4.
And I was 4 also. Okay, thank you, councillors. We will now move on to our final report, which is item 6.3, the Logan Plan Alignment to Shaping SEQ 2023. I note that 6.3 is also a public report, and I'll now refer to the City Planning Program Leader, Mr. Christian Parks, to speak to the report.
Thank you, Chair. Morning all. This report is an update. Following council endorsement of the draft Logan Plan last year, it was delivered to the State Government in September for review. The State had made requests for information back in November last year and February this year. As council officers, we've responded to 134 of those items, all of those items, in fact. Since that time, and only a matter of a few weeks ago, on the 24th of June, we received a letter, which is attachment 1 to this report. The State are advising us that their review period is going to be extended. They're seeking to extend that to request council to improve the alignment of our draft scheme with the updated regional plan. The updated regional plan dropped in place, I think, December last year. In this letter, the State have advised that we'll be required to undertake additional work. The letter also goes on and states that some of these changes may be required to the provision of density in our residential zones. We're not sure what that means at this stage. We haven't yet had any clarification from the State, but we've certainly sought it. I do want to assure the councillors that if through those meetings with the State with regards to density, that we'll be bringing back the scheme and those policy decisions to council for consideration before we agree to any changes. So despite the resulting delays to the delivery of the Logan Plan, this approach by the State to ask us to better amend or align the new scheme puts us in a better position to where we were 6 months ago. About 6 months ago, the State were asking us to actually go and amend our current planning scheme. That would have been a lot of work, and it would have meant that we were amending a scheme which we were going to replace in a couple of years. So the State have listened to our representations in that regard, and I think that's happened at several levels. So despite the delay, there's actually some good news that they're only asking us to amend the new scheme and not the current scheme. We'll continue to work with the State to address their required changes. As I said, if there's any significant policy changes, they'll certainly be brought back to this forum, and we'll continue to work with the State to get approval for public consultation of Logan Plan. At this stage, and it is hard to be definite, we expect that consultation will occur in the second half of next year. Thank you, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. I have Councillor Lane, followed by Mayor Raven, followed by Councillor Bradley.
Thanks very much. Christian, does this report that you brought back have any cost impact to council? Because it's not written in the report, that's all.
Through the Chair, we received a service enhancement for the new scheme 3, 4, 5 years ago. So at this stage, we're confident that we can absorb the changes within that funding. The only change that we anticipate will be to the service enhancement is actually the time frame. It had us only going to end of 25. I think that'll probably extend for a period, but we believe we've got adequate funding.
Right, and the vague reference to population density, are you seeking further clarification on the letter, or?
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lane. I have Mayor Raven, followed by Councillor Bradley, followed by Councillor Wilcox.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. Christian, do we know roughly how much it would have cost to have to do the alignment amendment, both in time and in resources?
Educated guess, you're probably looking at 3 to 6 months worth of work to an alignment amendment to the current scheme. Updating the systems, legal reviews, that sort of thing. I don't think there'd be change out of 100 grand.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Cool. And so this was something that when I first got elected as mayor, was a priority to get the state to be reasonable and consider that we're so close to delivering a new planning scheme that it would be much, much simpler for us to align. The Minister was pretty reluctant at first, but the conversations I had with the Premier were much more fruitful. And so I just wanted to give a shout out to Stephen Miles for encouraging the Minister to consider this option for us, which is very, very helpful, because another 6 months of uncertainty around planning during a housing crisis would have been a terrible outcome for the fastest growing city in the state, especially given the new planning scheme has so many good things for our city, improved design, density in places that make sense, and protecting people's suburban amenity in areas where we don't want to see subdivision. So this is really great outcome, and I'm very, very excited that we don't have to do an alignment amendment, mostly for your team and their stress levels, because I imagine they would have had to pull out all the stops to get something done in the time frame outline. And I look forward to seeing the changes in the planning scheme. If there's anything else we need to advocate for to make sure that we can get this done sooner rather than later, I'd still love to see it delivered by the end of next year rather than pushing to 2026. So happy to keep knocking on doors all the way up to and then after the state election.
Thank you, Mayor Raven. I have Councillor Bradley, followed by Councillor Wilcox, and then Councillor Jeremiah.
Thank you. Through the chair, my hand initially went up when there was reference to altering the public consultation, but my question was answered to halfway next year, whereas it was supposed to be halfway through this year. So it has been delayed by a year. I'm just curious if the density could possibly change with the change in state government, which is possibly likely.
Yeah. So I think I understand the question, Councillor Bradley. I don't know what a change in government will mean, so I can't comment on that. But what I was trying to explain is in the letter, and the letter's a little bit vague because they're after some information from us, but what the state are flagging is that across all the councils in SEQ, they've got a desire for certain types of development within certain zones. So to give you an example, and this goes back to the workshops we had with the councillors, I think it was 2 years ago, we looked to take multi-units, for example, out of the low density residential zone, keep suburbs for families, and that was well received when we discussed it at those workshops. The state have done some work and they're looking to put that back in simple terms. I don't know if that's definitely going to be the case. I think we can mount some arguments that, we're achieving our housing targets and, perhaps there's some other ways which we can get density in locations other than what they're looking at a simple level in the low density residential zone. We need to have those conversations with the state. We need to sit down round a table and work out exactly what they want. And as I said, if that is a change to the policy that you as councillors endorsed a couple of years ago, then we'll bring it back here for direction.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bradley. I have Councillor Wilcox and then Councillor Jeremiah.
Thank you. Just a question regarding the letter that was sent to Tess Pickering in attachment 2. In the letter, you discussed the PDA delivery and the shortfall in housing supply in these areas. Do we give a reason as to why the PDA targets aren't being met?
Through the chair, in the context of that letter, it's trying to make the point that the state government is pushing council to do a lot of the heavy lifting, to use that term, and we have been to date achieving the state targets. So what we're trying to say, I think quite politely, is look, don't push us so hard to go and change our planning scheme. We're actually doing quite a good job. Why don't you look at some of the areas where you've got more direct influence and make some changes there to increase your housing delivery?
Still doesn't say what's delivering well in the PDA and why some areas aren't. I think you could be more specific and be more direct in the specific areas or parts of the PDA that are delivering and that aren't delivering. So, for example, and I just said it, Flagstone is a cul-de-sac with very little road infrastructure, and with 40% of the proportion of Logan housing supply being or meant to be in the PDA, they simply need to build the infrastructure so that people can actually access it. Be more specific and be more direct, and I'm happy to help and I'm happy to advocate on this as well, because without that infrastructure or the lack of the infrastructure leading into the biggest cul-de-sac in the city and also being the largest landholder in the city, being Flagstone itself, or Flagstone proper as I would call it, Covella, Everleigh, Pebble Creek are actually doing quite well, but Flagstone itself is actually, I would say, falling quite short on delivering down there because of the lack of infrastructure. People are moving out there because it is a cost of living crisis and it's what they can afford. But if they can't get in and out and they're stuck on roads for an extra hour each way, they're not going to move out there because it takes them twice as long to get to their workplace, which is why people aren't moving into Flagstone proper as I would see it, because cost of living, I don't want to spend that much money on fuel getting to and from work if I live in Brisbane City. So I think you could be probably more direct in what you're trying to say.
Councillor Wilcox, happy to take that advice, and I'm happy to try and be even more direct in future correspondence to the state government.
Thank you, Councillor Wilcox. Okay. Councillor Jeremiah, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My questions are about the project timeline. I understand from the report that because of a dependency that we don't control, the state government, we're reliant on them for certain approvals to progress our project. Because of that dependency, there's been a delay, an 8-month approximate. So that pushes back the project completion from the end of 2025 to mid-2026. Is that the approximate project timeline?
Yes, so roughly that's correct. And sorry, just to build on that a little bit, don't underestimate how much impact long-term projects like this have on when there's a state election coming up. So caretakers mode, that really slows things down for the department.
Thank you. So there's a risk that there'll be even more delays realised because of that dependency. So the project completion date could be pushed out even further past mid-2026.
Through the Chair, it's possible. We don't think that it's likely to be outside 2026. But again, there's a few risks up in the air. So the state government has been slow to respond to us. We've had to really advocate for them not to do an alignment amendment. If they were to give us an alignment amendment, which was an amendment to our current planning scheme, we would have basically had to put the whole planning scheme on hold. And if there's a change of governments, there's the machinery of government, which takes a long time to sort out. So yeah, there is risks, and the Christians team, they are absolutely doing the best they can to get these things to the state government. They are working very long hours, but it's that dependency on the state government which is ingrained within the Planning Act, really is an issue that the state needs to look at.
Thank you. And because of the way the legislation's set up, we don't control state government's actions, and that's completely okay. It's affected our project. I understand, and according to the attachment letters that have been sent over the past few months, and according to the Logan City Council external public-facing website, the project was referred to as Logan Plan 2025. In this new report, the project's referred to just as the Logan Plan. I presume that is to manage expectations, as the project is likely not to be completed in 2025. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Great. If that's the case, I've talked to my community about Logan Plan 2025, and they have the reasonable expectation that we expect it to be completed in 2025. If we're changing the project terminology in our internal documents, I think it'd be worthwhile changing it on our external documents as well. On the website right now, it's Logan Plan 2025. There's plenty of marketing materials around that says 2025. So I'll be going on a journey of expectation management with my constituents, and it might be worthwhile changing the external facing documents as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeremiah. Okay, if there's no further questions, I'll have a motion. Yep. Deputy Mayor Bannon has moved the motion. Councillor Murphy has seconded the motion. Open the floor to vote. All those in favour? That has been passed unanimously. Thank you, councillors. Okay, so that concludes the agenda. Oh, wait a second. Does anyone have any general business for the Economic Development and City Planning Manager? No. Mr Radich, do you have any general business for us?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day. So that now concludes the agenda for today's meeting. Does anyone have any general business for the Director of Growth, Economy and Sustainability? No. Mr Hanson, do you have any general business for us? No. Wonderful. So I now declare the City Planning, Economic Development and Environment meeting of the 10th of July concluded at 10:19 a.m. The City Lifestyle meeting will begin in 10 minutes at 10:29. Thank you, councillors.